And good evening to all our fellow listeners and followers. This is Sunday, September 3rd at 8:23 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode is two segments going back to know your 4th Amendment rights and a Labor Day message to your law enforcement union. We got Labor Day tomorrow. It's the, celebration of communism. I don't know why we celebrate that, but we got some recent police stories to talk about, and going to talk a little bit about unions and how they've been helping to destroy America with the politicians for a long time.
Yeah, particularly law enforcement union that, which again, law enforcement union kind of cuddles to these type of tyrannical enforcers of the law. And I want to show the hypocrisy of being a member of a union, and particular law enforcement, and also the politicians that cuddle up to these law enforcement individuals that, they ignore our 4th Amendment right. They really do. So, but let's start. Let's start with you, Seth, and let's share some stories of abuse by law enforcement across the country.
Yeah, one of the recent ones I've seen was out of Daytona Beach, your neck of the woods down in Florida.
It's Florida.
Where we had an individual. What had happened was the police were called out to a neighborhood to deal with a mental health situation. I don't know much about that case in particular, because what it turned into was a cop violating another neighbor's Second Amendment and 4th Amendment rights, and a lot of violations that went on of 1st Amendment rights. If you watch the video, which I'll share tomorrow, but effectively the what happened was the cops were out to a neighbor who was having a mental health issue. That person that the cops were dealing with had a pit bull. The pit bull got out. Pit bull chases a 6-year-old girl into her home, and the father of the 6-year-old girl comes out, yelling, get your dog, stuff like that, like come get your dog, and he's upset because apparently that dog's been loose before, and the cops are coming over, and this guy didn't even know the cops were there. He wasn't there. He wasn't part of the initial reason the cops were there. So for all he knows, he was just yelling at his neighbor. And a cop comes over and starts dealing with this father who's upset that the dog chased his daughter, and he's got a gun on him. The father has a gun on him. He's open carrying on his property, which is his right. There was no violation of the law here, and the cop comes over, the initial cop comes over, and the cop's upset that the father's yelling at him, and he seems like he has hurt feelings, and so he decides to arrest this guy basically for open carrying. And if you watch the video, after he gets the father in handcuffs, he's sitting down, reads him his rights. There's a moment in the video where the cops go and they talk to his 6-year-old daughter. They go into his home without a warrant, which they don't have a right to do. That you're not allowed to go on the property like that without a warrant. And they interview his 6-year-old daughter without his knowledge, which that's a violation too. You can't interview kids without a parent there. Eventually you see a whole bunch of cops colluding together. They're like, one cop is kind of saying, I don't think we have anything to charge him with here. But they're trying to find ways to make this arrest legitimate when they messed up. Eventually his wife, the father's wife, comes home and starts talking with the police, and she's upset with her husband being in handcuffs, and it actually is a pretty good example of how to deal with police, because once this guy was in handcuffs, he shut his mouth. He was not talking to the police. He knew his right to remain silent, and he was using it, and he was even telling his wife, hey, they've already read my rights, don't speak to the police. He was telling his wife to just, hey, zip it, don't talk to them. There's a bunch of violations in this case.
Yeah, and the initial issue with this is that he had his dog, which again, I know pit bulls has had a negative aspect towards them, but depends. I've always said this depends how you train your pet. You could train your pet to be a nice animal or a wild animal, and pit bulls has had that negative aspect of them, and it's not really fair to them. It's more unfair to the owner that doesn't know how to train him to be a nice dog. But nevertheless, this dog was outside, they said they was chasing a little girl. Did they, question said, because you probably saw the video more than me, but did that dog bit or bit the child? Was there any dog marks on the child?
On that front, watching the video, the dog actually seems pretty harmless. The father was really upset. He's got a 6-year-old girl who's scared of dogs. I mean, look, I agree with you what you're saying about pit bulls. Pit bulls get a bad rap, and if you train them right, they're as good at dogs as any. But the dog seemed harmless. On that front, there wasn't any problem. But if you're a father, and your neighbor has a dog who the neighbor lets the dog get out occasionally, look, you got to be the dogs seem to be trained up well not to attack people, but you still got to keep your dog on a leash and not running free in the neighborhood. I mean, that's the father, I think, is justifiably angry because his daughter's scared of dogs. The whole thing is he stays on his property. The dog, nothing happened to the dog as far as I know. There were no bites. It didn't attack. But, I understand little kids can be scared of dogs, and especially if it's not their dog. So, on that front, nothing happened.
No, yeah, and it's common sense of both parts because, unless you train your dog properly that, he can be in the porch area or in your property and the dog knows not to go anywhere else, that's fine. But typically, common sense says keep your dog inside your area, either on a leash or there should be a gate. But on the other side, the common sense on the parent, if you see a loose animal loose, you want to protect your family and you want to tell your dog to come back inside and close the door and all that. But if that was the initial complaint, then, police officers should have acted on that, despite if Florida is an open carry state on your private property, when you go out to public accommodations, you have to conceal it, but it's you can still carry it, just concealed, but open carry in your private property. So, this is an issue that I've always had where law enforcement, goes beyond. I mean, your job is, I get it, to all the cops out there, law enforcement, your job is tough. I understand it. It's a very life-threatening occupation, but you don't have to make it that tough. You are there to maintain the peace and the justice, but maintain it efficiently and as quiet as possible. But when you start acting like the executioner, then I have a problem. Like, on many fronts, like George Floyd and all the other individuals, Gray in Baltimore, Eric Garner in New York City, and then etc. So, or even in Ferguson, Missouri. Your job is not that hard. Your job is hard, I get it, but it's not that hard. You don't have to make it that hard. And when I see law enforcement disobey the law and all that, and arresting somebody for they know that it's wrong, it just boggles the mind that nobody does anything to rein in on these individuals that are actually breaking the law, breaking your citizens' rights. And I just in that one, that story really intrigued me, because this person may have broken the law, broken a rules on the dog not being on a leash. That's fine, but to go after him on something else and to start searching his domicile without a proper search warrant, it just boggles my mind that cops don't have rights. We as citizens have rights, and I'm tired of politicians always not respecting the 4th Amendment, and Supreme Court justices not respecting our 4th Amendment right. Cops don't have rights. They only apply if they are civilians. But right now they're not civilians. They're law enforcement officers. So they don't share that same rights as we as citizens do. So I couldn't stress this more enough. And I'll let you get a word, and then I'd like to take on how this really has become.
Yeah, and like what you were just saying there, here's the real big issue in this case. I mean, if you watch the video, effectively the initial cop who arrests the guy, puts him in handcuffs, you can tell that he just got his feelings hurt. Well, if you're a cop, you've got to stop. You need to be able to not take things personally. You're dealing with a father who's upset that a neighbor's dog chased his daughter into their house, and this guy didn't even realize the cops were there. The father didn't even know the cops were there, because cops were there for a completely separate issue. This is one of the bigger things. We talk when the media, they like to blast certain local police stories in our faces, when it comes to, and it's usually around that they're pushing a narrative. It's usually trying to push a racial lens or something like that. We've got to realize, and this is to both sides, to the police and to the citizenry. Number one, you are more likely as a citizen to be shot by a cop and killed by a cop than a cop is to be killed by the citizen. Statistics show that by a wide margin. But even still, that's unlikely on both sides. It doesn't happen as much as the media wants us to think. But where the police have a real problem are in these types of scenarios where the police get offended by something because somebody's exerting their rights. That tends to get cops upset, because cops are trained to think that they have authority over people. A cop does not have authority over you unless you're suspected of a crime. That's a big thing that police should be trained on, is that you're not some all-powerful authority figure. There's nobody is an all-powerful authority figure. You only have authority when somebody has committed a crime or is suspected of committing a crime. And police need to not be offended by somebody exerting their rights. If you watch some of these, there are YouTube channels like Lackluster and Audit the Audit, who kind of show a lot of these types of videos where it could be a normal traffic stop, and you got a driver who, they might give their ID, but they don't answer questions. The cop will be fishing for information, and you'll see cops get offended, like, dude, just answer my questions. Like, well, I have a right not to answer your questions. I've given you every piece of information I have to give you. And that's a real problem, is that there are a lot of police who get offended when citizens exert their rights, when they say, I'm going to remain silent, I've given you my ID, just do what you got to do. And that's a real issue. And, ultimately, the biggest problem is that there's just no accountability. We rely on the police to police themselves. And that's a problem. That is not a system that works. It's fundamentally flawed, and it needs to change. Police, it's a necessary function of local government. And like I like to say all the time, when the media pushes out these local stories, and we get the reaction from the left is defund the police, the reaction from the right is to defend the police, and I'm sitting here saying we need to have local police, and we need to have local municipalities taking care of their own problems. And that's the big issue in America, is that there is no local control anymore, and that's beyond just police, but we really need to localize police and have local people take care of the problems that they see locally.
No, you're right. And one thing to your point, Seth, is that they get kind of flustered when you don't want to bow down to the authority. And you're right, cops don't have that authority, and you don't just because they're asking questions, you don't have to answer any questions. And that's where this myth of law enforcement authority comes in. And it's because the Supreme Court and federal government agencies and the federal government, the National Congress, has made it so. Like we are here to protect you. No, you're here to protect us if we commit a crime or if there's a crime involved, but not to this extent. And the problem is that sadly, we've had Supreme Court justices where they are flimsy, where they are unpredictable. And Justice White says that there is nothing in the Constitution which prevents a policeman from addressing questions to anyone on the streets. Yes, there is. It's called the 4th Amendment. Come on. For Justice White to say that is just blatantly arrogant and completely disrespectful to the Constitution and to the 4th Amendment. What do you mean there's nothing in the Constitution? Yes, there is. It's called the 4th Amendment. So, when I saw that first sentence in his concurrence opinion to Terry versus Ohio, this is the reason why we have placed the law enforcement on a pedestal, and they're like the gods that we cannot touch. And then here comes politicians, mostly from the Republican side. Sometimes in the old days it was the Democrats, like with Bull Connor and Al Lingo and all those. But now it's Republicans who treat this like if we have to bow down. Since when do we have to bow down to law enforcement? They're supposed to bow down to us. We are the citizens. We have the power. We have the rights. So it just infuriates me that, normal, citizens don't really understand, and the media doesn't, they think Terry versus Ohio was, nothing ordinary. And I keep telling people, you got to read Supreme Court rulings because that affects our lives, and we have to find ways to overturn and to get rid of this type of rulings because they are a blatant disregard to the Constitution and to our rights. So cops don't have the right to ask questions. We have the right to reserve to answer any questions. And cops, it's like, cops have a narcissistic personality that they want the control. They need the control. And when they're not getting it, then they get forceful. And then they start putting people in handcuffs because sadly, law enforcement has become a very narcissistic personality disorder. And, when they don't get that control, they will act on it. They will act on it with action.
Yeah, and just to bring up another case I saw recently. Last year there was a college kid who was pulled over because he had his brights on. So it was a minor traffic offense, and the cop starts fishing, like acting like he was under the influence. The kid was not under the influence. He blew a 0.00, and he still got arrested for driving under the influence, because basically it's because he mouthed off to the cops, and in that case, I would actually say that the kid unfortunately complied with the officer's request to do the DUI, what is it called? The field testing, the field sobriety test. If you get pulled over and a cop starts accusing you of being under the influence, I would just say do not do the field sobriety test. You do not have to do the field sobriety test. But effectively, if you watch that video, again, it was the cop got offended because the kid was kind of talking back to him, and I thought he was actually a pretty respectful kid. I don't think he was all that demeaning. He didn't. He was compliant, and basically once the cops started accusing him of smelling alcohol in his breath, that's when the kid started to talk back a little bit, because he had nothing to drink. He blew 0.00, and then once he blows 0.00, the cop shifts his accusation from, well, have you used marijuana? And he's like, wait a minute, you just said you smelled alcohol on my breath, not marijuana. Now you're saying I'm smoking marijuana. It's kind of a funny video if you watch it, but it's ultimately, and he got hit the charge. He never was charged because, again, he did nothing wrong. And they'd be in big legal trouble if they did charge him. But he did get arrested and brought to prison for several hours before he was cleared of being under the influence. And this is a real problem. Is that police getting their feelings hurt? Look, if you pull somebody over, don't act as if. Don't be surprised when somebody is a little pushy, because you're about to take money from them. I mean, you pull people over. You should expect that people are going to be a little upset because they're worried they're going to get a ticket and they're going to have money taken away from them, and so the police need to be trained to have a better attitude about dealing with the public, and that's ultimately that will happen, in my opinion, if we actually had local police. If the local people were in charge of their local police, and that's the big problem that we talk about on a whole lot of issues, is just how the federal government is stepping in to do stuff that they have no authority to do. And so, I just believe in localizing police, and that's that would help us deal with these problems a lot more.
Well, but the problem is the local police are acting like tyrants because the federal government has given that authority to them. So, I mean, giving in charge to citizens to take over, Then we'll have little Zimmermans running around, and I really don't want that, because I don't want vigilante justice. Law enforcement need to know what their duties are and what their actions are. And with this young man that you mentioned in another video, when cops start to because starting to lose control, again, because I think they're very narcissistic and they're very controlling. And so they start losing that control, and they're going to insert that lovable thing they call probable cause. So, I smell marijuana. I smell alcohol in your breath. Here, take a breathalyzer. Which, again, all this is against your 4th Amendment. You can't force anybody to do something without a warrant. If you think this person is drinking, then you hold them right there and you get yourself a warrant. If it takes all night, well, wake up the judge from his sleep and tell him to issue a warrant. Because, that's the proper way. But this, losing control and inserting probable cause is just, it's just, arrogant and distorting the actual truth on what your rights are. So, this young man that did this, I've seen it, where cops, smell probable cause and all that. And yet again, when back in 1989, when Jeffrey Dahmer was, he had one of his victims, and cops were there, and cops did not do anything. And that's the thing, is that cops, if they're supposed to help us, they're supposed to protect the society from people like Jeffrey Dahmer, then do it. Don't just make fun of him because he's homosexual and that was his gay lover. Whatever it is, that the young man didn't look so well. They should have taken action. They should have taken him. They should have. Taken to the hospital or called a paramedic. But that's the problem that I have, is that cops forget what they're doing and they just want to do it just because they're arrogant, and it just makes me really mad. And then you have politicians where they will support these narcissistic personalities, because yet again, politicians are narcissists as well, and they want to install control. One thing I like to bring on my next segment on a Labor Day message is that Governor DeSantis of Florida, he always backed the blue, and then we see him speaking in one of the largest labor unions of police unions in Chicago, Illinois. So this is a man that, he doesn't care about the citizen. He doesn't care about citizens' rights. He wants to look nice in the camera and install control and give credit and merit to police units and police for his own personal agenda. And that's where I have a big beef. And yet the media just sees that. They don't see our rights being threatened. They don't see all our rights, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, our citizen rights. And they just see politicians like that. And that's why, tomorrow is Labor Day, which I like to call it Workers' Day, because it's not really labor. Labor just collects the union dues of our workforce. So I like to call Happy Workers' Day. And keep in mind that unions and police unions don't really give anything about us. They just want to make money and see control.
Yeah, and when we talk about unions, both you and I worked for National Right to Work Committee in a past life, and I would suspect we generally hold the same view that unions are not good in general. I'm not a fan of unionism, but I will delineate between public sector and private sector. As much as I don't really like unions in the private sector either, but there's more leeway for them in the private sector. But public sector unions should not exist. You got to understand that we the people are supposed to be the boss. And so what's happening is we got these unions in the public sector who, their interests are against us. And when you take a job in the government, whether it be police, be teachers in public schools, whatever the job is, you're supposed to be a public servant. And we've lost that. They've lost their idea of public service, and they've turned themselves into masters over us, and that's a big problem. But you mentioned earlier about how police don't have rights, we have rights, and that's you bring up the endorsement or Ron DeSantis speaking to the Chicago Police Union, and he was apparently endorsed by Florida's largest police union. Well, I don't think unions should have the right to endorse candidates. They need to stay out of the political sphere. When you're on duty, you actually don't have First Amendment rights, or at least your First Amendment rights are limited. When you're off duty, okay, you have all the same rights as the rest of us. But when you're working in your capacity as a public servant, your rights are diminished. You need to treat the public with respect, and you need to respect everybody's opinion in politics. And I don't think unions should have the right to endorse candidates at all.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And, I know that you and I both work for a anti-labor organization, National Right to Work Committee, and we saw the terrible things that labor unions do to get votes and all that. And, I always said that unions did serve a purpose a long time ago. Now, I think they're just doing it just to collect money. Right now, we've seen on the entertainment side, they're still on strike. The writers, the actors in Hollywood, and then now we're seeing flight attendants for American Airlines go on strike. So, and then sometimes police goes on strike because they're authorized by the union to go on strike. So, unions are not helping anybody. Unions are and then with the whole Black Lives Matter, where did you see a police union stick up for George Floyd or Freddie Gray or Eric Garner or even Trayvon? Well, Trayvon was killed by vigilante, but where was the police union? They're not there. They've never been for the working man of this country, and cops neither. And to see, again, in the famous 2008 case of D.C. versus Heller was a Metropolitan D.C. police officer, and he got pulled over because he was off duty and he was just a citizen, and he got pulled over because he didn't have secured his weapon in his car, and that's why he got pulled over. And of course, D.C. versus Heller championed the Second Amendment. Because again, it's your private property in your car and in your home, and it's a right. Many people don't like the Second Amendment, but until then, it's our right to carry arms. Arms. It doesn't have to be a gun. It could be a knife. It could be a baseball bat. It could be a whatever. It says arms. It doesn't specify to be guns. It just says arms, but nevertheless. So I always say that, police unions, and then you mentioned public and private sector. I think, unions should exist. If you want to pay dues to a union and you want to be let me take it back. If you want to give money to your local union, that's fine. If you want to partake on that, that's fine. But why should this other person, he shouldn't be able to be forced to pay dues to a union as a condition of employment. And, that's unfair. But yet again, on the whole purpose of labor police union, they've never cared for our citizens' rights. They just care to collect their dues from their members or non-members, and endorse political candidates like Ron DeSantis, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, etc. So they just care to do political fundraisers and collect their money. That's all they care about, money. They don't care about us. They never have, never will, and their members don't care about us. And of course, cops always say, well, what about our rights? Well, take off that badge. You become one of us. You've got that right. Until then, you're a public official. You're a law enforcement official. You don't have rights. You have to support us. You have to protect us, not put us down, not put us in protective custody. So, and here's another thing that I love, Seth. I know I'm bringing the Trump indictments, but I know many people have said that the Trump indictments are like Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. And I said to myself, really? Do I see Donald Trump being dragged into a gulag or into a Dachau concentration camp? No. It's ridiculous how, the media and right-wing politics do this. Allegedly he broke the law. He's going to go to trial for that, and we're going to see how it goes. But, this is something that, the hypocritical, where they always back the FBI, but, they attacked Donald Trump. Oh, the FBI is bad. Oh, it's politicization of the FBI, of the DOJ. I mean, the DOJ and the FBI has always been like this. Law enforcement has always been like this. So why are they crying wolf now?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we see, and I've talked about this before. How both the right and the left, the so-called right and the so-called left, basically. They will make the same arguments just at different times. When Trump's targeted by the FBI, suddenly law enforcement is not good according to conservatives, and it's great according to the liberals. But when it's going after the other side, had Donald Trump actually locked Hillary Clinton up, it would have been the exact opposite. It's just we need consistency, and that's we lack consistency. And like I brought up, I don't think the police unions should be allowed to endorse candidates. And if I said that about the teachers unions, conservatives would generally agree with me. Oh, yeah, the union shouldn't be allowed to endorse. And then the left would be like, oh, of course they should be allowed to endorse. But then we got the police unions, the roles would be reversed. The conservatives would be all happy because police unions tend to endorse Republicans, whereas teachers unions tend to endorse Democrats. We need to have a principle, and my principle is, well, first off, public sector unions should not exist. They should not be allowed to exist, but unfortunately we have them. So since they're there, they have no rights to endorse candidates. We need to have a consistent principle that this is the way it ought to be, and the unions, if we're going to have them, again, I want them shut down in the public sector, but if we're going to have them, they don't get to endorse candidates. They need to shut up when it comes to politics, because they work in a public capacity. And so, we need to have consistent messaging and have consistent principles that apply to everyone.
I see your point with public sector unions. You're right. They serve the public sector, and they shouldn't be allowed to have political opinions on it. Private sector is so different, but right, thank God that they shut down on public sector union dues with the Supreme Court ruling of Janus versus AFSCME, 2018. So they're losing power. Thank God that they can't charge non-members. Or they can't charge members union dues as a condition of employment. So now they have to compete in competition, which monopolies hate that when they have to get competition. But and the whole thing with teachers union and all that. And you're right, there is a line of inconsistency where it's good on this side and not good for that side, and you cannot have that. The law doesn't see it that way. There is no good or bad or the lesser of two evils, which I despise. I hate that phrase, the lesser of two evils. There is none of that. It's, either the Constitution or the law, and we all have to abide by it. We all have to be equal under the law and under everything. So, if Trump was arrested, well, that's because they found evidence, and the DOJ must act on it. If during Trump, he could have asked the DOJ and the Attorney General to arrest or get a warrant to arrest Hillary Clinton. He never did it. Well, that's his luck. I mean, that's his stupidity. But yet again, you can't say, oh, the DOJ was good back then, but now it's bad because they attacked their hero. Well, no. So, it's this polarization of the media and parties and being a Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative that is just bringing, as you said, inconsistencies, and it lacks consistency. And that's something where we see with law enforcement that, where there is a lot of inconsistency of who are we arresting, why are we, arresting, why is the police with this person, and what has he done. If he's done something bad, then get yourself a warrant and arrest him and bring him forth to trial. That's the due process. They're skipping all that, and they're cops are making them, the executioner, and denying the due process of the law and just arresting them and put them in handcuffs and say you're guilty. That's it. No, you're guilty until the presumption of innocence. You're presumed innocent until you're found guilty. So this is something that even Trumpers don't understand. Trump is innocent until proven guilty. I hope he's found guilty. Let's, keep our fingers crossed. But he's innocent until proven guilty. And as well as everybody, Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or whoever, they're innocent until proven guilty. There is no protective custody. There is no sending to the gulags. So we need to knock that crap off. And, we need to... my main concern in this segment is that we have more rights than politicians. We have more rights than law enforcement, and they cannot take away our rights. And, people need to understand that. When I see both black citizens or white citizens or Hispanic citizens or whoever, American citizens, they have to respect our rights no matter what, because we have them and they don't.
Yeah, and we need to know what our rights are, and we need to not be afraid to exert our rights. You get pulled over. I believe you should be respectful. But if a cop is fishing and asking you questions to get more information that they don't have a right to, don't answer them. Don't be afraid to say, yeah, I'm not going to answer your questions. Because ultimately, when you're dealing with police, they're fishing for information to prove you guilty of something. You got to know that. You got to know that they're trying to find you guilty. They're trying to collect evidence against you, and you do not need to help them get evidence against you. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to not let police search your vehicle. We talk about Supreme Court and just giving deference to police. They've set up these rules to basically make it easier for police to violate your rights. And with things like, it used to be you had to get a warrant to be able to search a vehicle or a house or something. But now, they can bring out a police dog who can be trained to hit when the dog never even smelled anything, and which are completely unreliable. And yet, the courts allow police to use dogs to give them permission to search your property without getting a warrant, and that's a problem. We need to know our rights and be willing to exert our rights. Like I said, be respectful when you're dealing with police. Because you don't want to get arrested. You don't want to get a ticket. You don't. But always stand up for your rights. If a cop gets offended by you standing up for your rights, don't let it faze you. Just keep standing up for your rights. And, if that cop's offended, that's on him, not you.
Yeah, and always remember that there is something in the Constitution that forbids a cop to ask questions, and that's the 4th Amendment. And if he has a problem with that, you tell him. I will tell him, get yourself a warrant, and and then we can talk. But you don't have to talk. You don't have to install that. You don't have to get that fear in his controlling eyes and arms and demeanor. So, I always, that's why when, in looking back at this Supreme Court ruling, that I wish this Supreme Court would get rid of it, but sadly, the Supreme Court is unpredictable as the one in the the Chief Justice Earl Warren Court, and very unpredictable as the Warren Burger Court, and even so it is very unpredictable. And the Roberts Court is the biggest one, the biggest unpredictability I have ever seen in my entire life. You have people like Alito that favors First Amendment, but yet will take it down on the Fourth Amendment. You have Thomas that always been against the Fourth Amendment. So it's really unpredictable, because you have, I don't know where Barrett or Gorsuch or Kavanaugh stands. I think Kavanaugh will be more for law enforcement than Gorsuch, but we don't know. It's a very unpredictable court. So, read your Supreme Court rulings on the Fourth Amendment, because there's a lot of things that you don't know. And one thing that I would just want to point before I give you my closing statement is that when I said read Supreme Court rulings, read them, because I was not aware that in 1917, the Supreme Court said that residential segregation was unconstitutional, and yet somehow that continued to be a practice. Residential segregation was continued to be a practice, not until this day, but to the 80s and 90s, and maybe to the early 2000s, where, there was still kind of a segregated residential zone. And, this is where you have a lot of ignorance from a lot of people. And I was unaware of that until I read that in 1917, the Supreme Court said that residential segregation was unconstitutional. Wow. And all this time, there was, the city of Coral Gables was segregated with the city of Liberty City or Hialeah. So, and vice versa, all across the country. So Beverly Hills was predominantly white. And you had the city of Compton, who was predominantly black. So, it's the ignorance that keeps us down. They want to keep us down. They don't want to keep us educated. And you got to educate yourself. You got to know what's going out there. And that's why read Ontario versus Ohio on your rights, because what Justice White says is totally wrong. And know your rights. You have more rights than law enforcement. You have more rights than the government. There's even a Bill of Rights that gives us that rights. Don't ever take that away from us, because they have that keeps them under control, and we have the control. So in my last segment would be just know your rights and know your Bill of Rights, and law enforcement has absolutely no rights whatsoever.
Yeah, and that's for the public sector employees. You don't have rights when you're in your capacity as a public employee. I mean, your rights are diminished. You don't have the same rights, and we need to understand that. We need the public sector employees to get back to the public servant mindset, mm-hmm. and not acting as if they're masters over us. And that's what I've been covering local government for a long time, and you can see the attitude, whether it's municipalities or school districts, whatever it is, that they have a mindset that they have power over you, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be servants to you, and we need to get back to that mindset.
No, you're right. We do, and you said a very important point, that public servants need to get back into being public servants, and not like they're high of the high holiest. And for example, like what was her name? The one from Kentucky that didn't want to give out same-sex marriage licenses. If she I know she may not agree with same-sex marriage. I don't agree with how the Supreme Court has made it, but, it is what it is, and, she has to follow the Constitution. And if the Supreme Court says that same-sex marriage is covered, then, which I disagree, but, she's a public servant, and she has to follow it. If she doesn't like it, there's the door, and get yourself a job with Hobby Lobby. I'm sure they'd love to take you. But public servants need to go back in protecting the public, not being the master of, like you said, the master and the high of the holiest. And they need to respect our rights no matter what.
Yeah. It's just it's really that simple. If get into and this is because we've been talking about unions. The unions have created this. I look at, if you look at public employees, not only do they have better benefits by and large generally than the private sector, they've been starting in the last couple decades. They're making higher salaries as well. If you compared them to a private sector position that's similar to what their public sector job is, they really have created an attitude of superiority when they're supposed to be servants, and the unions have gone a long way in creating that attitude. So, we should destroy the public sector unions and create public servants again.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right, and that's a good point, Seth. That public sector unions, I would say, their contracts are probably a little bit heftier and nicer than private sector because, again, they're beholden to public taxation. Private companies are beholden in their profits, and so it's very difficult. But public sector has probably better benefits than the private sector, and I've seen in DC, the public sector, the federal public sector unions and the union workers, they have houses in Montgomery County, Maryland. They have houses in Loudoun County, Maryland, two of the most richest counties in the United States, and that majority of the workforce lives in those areas. But yet again, you're right. They have created a sense of superiority, superiorness. That it needs to be disbanded because they really have really made a mockery of it, and it's just we really need to get rid of public sector employees as much as possible because they have created this chaos.
Yeah. Just to summarize here is just know your rights. Use your rights. Don't be afraid to use your rights. And to the public sector employees, understand you're a servant, not our masters.
Correct. And on that note, have yourself a happy Workers' Day tomorrow. Not Labor Day, Workers' Day, because it's your day, not labor. And enjoy it and stay safe.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.